Today we'll be traveling up Interstate 5 towards Carlsbad. To Pea Soup Anderson's, located at Palomar Airport Road and I-5. A very nice restaurant, hotel, and has a meeting room where the Southern California Contest Club will be meeting. We traveled from all portions of San Diego and LA to come to the meeting. There's Wayne at 6MB. Jim Niger, 36TJ, Ken K5Q, Terry W6MKB, Jim K6ZH, and Mary N6AZE, Dennis N6KI, Art K6XT, enjoying some of that great pea soup with fixings. That's good. The main course is a chicken sandwich or Caesar salad.
I called him, I said, we're not busy, but one you ever eat, and
Okay, that makes it nice and easy. And we'll get going in a minute here.
I've got one, I'm not sure. Johnny Sass, is that for you? I've already got Okay, gentlemen, get started here. I'm Larry, N6AZE.
So it's
I'm Larry, N6AZE, and welcome to our sweepstakes clinic meeting. I guess the club has done this before. I wasn't a member then, but anyway, it seemed like a good idea. We talked W6SX and some others thought it might be a good idea to renew this. And we followed through on it and have been fortunate to have three of our notable club members who are sweepstakes pros, Glenn, K6NA, Charlie, W6UQF, and Dave, K6LL.
who came all the way from you.
Right.
I had to leave his job at the switching yard.
Just let me give you a little biographical information vis-a-vis the sweepstakes. Glenn, K6NA, formerly W6MAR, and a couple of other calls, has been licensed since 1959. A lot of people, not in sweepstakes, but a lot of people know that Glenn goes down and does 9Y4H and a lot of the DX contests. He won the sweepstakes in 1967, CW from W9YT, and he's done probably 33 sweepstakes in his lifetime and probably worked about 500,000 contest QSOs. Charlie, W6UQF, has been licensed since 1952 under that same call. He often wins our section and region for sweepstakes. He's done 35 or 36 sweepstakes since he's been licensed. And he's also done about 500,000 contest Qs in his ham lifetime. Dave, K6LL, formerly K1JYN, was licensed in 1959. He's been contesting ever since. He's been in the sweepstakes 30 years on and off, mostly on. He's been in the top 10 in both modes frequently. Nationally, that's what he shoots for when he enters. And he won the sweepstakes nationwide at least once. He, too, has done about 500,000 contest QSOs in his lifetime, so we thought they're all eminently qualified to speak to us today. You'll notice at your place here we have these orange stickers. This is sort of a follow-up on our little problem we had last year for sweepstakes. We actually beat the Northern California Contest Club if you count all the Southern California Contest Club members who entered sweepstakes. Some people forgot to change their CT summary sheet and put Southern California Contest Club on the summary sheet, which is what the ARL needs to count the score. So, according to the ARL, Northern California Club beat us. If we had had all our scores with Southern California Contest Club marked on the summary sheet, we would have beat them by 1,000,000 points. So this year, I decided to get these stickers. You got one each for phone and one for CW. Just slap this puppy right on that summary sheet when you send it in, and they can't hardly miss it. It's bright orange, okay? And I'm going to send them out to everybody in the club, too, with a sort of our follow-up letter that'll appear in the next couple of weeks here.
So we're not going to try to be medium category?
Well, I don't think we have. To tell you the truth, if all our entries had been counted last year, we would have been in the unlimited category and we would have beat everybody in the country. Okay, so it's significant that we put these stickers on and make sure that we're counted. So I don't want to make an issue of medium or not medium. I think we should encourage as many people as possible to participate and do as well as they can, and then the chips will fall where they may. And I think that's the way we should go about it. It's fun, right? That's why we're doing it. And I hope everybody got one. Dave prepared a sheet here with some sweepstakes contest tips and techniques. If you haven't, he's got some more up here afterward. So without further ado, let me start here on the stage left with Glenn, K6NA.
This is not a microphone over here, I guess. Okay. Oh, we'll just hold this thing, I guess. This is ugly.
Like we used to use W9YT.
Hand mic. Okay, good to see everybody here, and especially the old-timers like N6TJ, who retired from the sweepstakes so many years ago. But
Come back.
yeah, he's like some of the the Hollywood stars and the politicians. He retires mainly so he can make a comeback, kind of like the Michael Jordans of the world. It's more fun to make a comeback. You get more money. Actually, I came over today and I was hoping Dave would have a handout sheet, which he did. So now I know how to do it too. This is what I was waiting for, was the K6LL secrets. So I'll review them later, as you all will too. I think we're going to pass it around and sort of make general comments, and we'll assume there'll be some input from you guys as well. Things like station setup, the mechanics of things like that, we might talk about a little further in. One of the things I did in trying to prepare a little bit for this was looked at last year's log, and I looked at a log or two that I have from 10 or 15 years ago, see if there are any similarities and what's going on. The most consistent thing is that I notice is that I still can't win from California. No matter how good your station gets, I keep making it better, but I keep getting older 1 year at a time, and I guess, the equipment accelerates, the age makes you go this way, and the curves never are going to converge again to where you can do it. But it is true that in the SS, the biggest stations in the country are almost all active in the contest now, and 20 years ago that was not the case. A lot of the big DX contesters, W3AUs of the world, let's say, either thought the sweepstakes was like below them or whatever the motivation was, they just never allowed people to get on much from them. So the sweepstakes used to be dominated by guys with one tower and fairly modest antennas and not even 40-meter beams. But I don't think that's the case much anymore. With the exception of K6LL, who does have, I think, one tower, and it's 70 feet high, and so...
48.
48 feet.
48.
Oh, sorry. He sold his 70-foot tower in LA when he moved away.
To Wayne.
Yeah.
Yes, it'll be on this year.
Okay, good. Became the tower trailer.
Right. Groove wheels.
But there aren't many guys like Dave who have been at it so consistently so long and understand all of what it takes. And so, you know, he's, I would say, somewhat of an exception in the guys that with that level of hardware. I think he now has 2 radios. Well, he can talk to you, but so he's making some improvements too. And he's always tough. The other thing I looked at was this latest NCJ luckily had an article that speaks to a real critical thing. There's an article by Dave Patton, who operates at K4VX, and of course his main reason to write the article was to find out for himself why it is that he can't win from Missouri, and he's written an article that does appear to analyze the reason successfully why you can't win the sweepstakes from Missouri. And the analysis he did, if any of you didn't see it, it's in the September-October here, if you want to look at it before you go. Basically, the guys that have access via 10 meters in good conditions to the largest metro areas of the United States probably can win the sweepstakes. If they don't, there are some other little factors perhaps, but they will be among the highest groups. And you know, his analysis does sort of make it look like what we've intuitively known all along. If you're in Missouri, you just don't have access to enough population centers. You don't see Chicago on 10 meters and a few other things, Ohio probably, things like that. So that was a real eye-opener. But it kind of speaks to, it sort of confirms really what I've known intuitively all along, you know, for 25 years at least, which is from the West Coast, you start on the highest band open and you stay there as long as you can, and when you think it's slowing down, go to the next band down. You know, don't go to 40 very soon, don't even go to 20 very soon. You tune on 20 at the start of CW sweepstakes and it's absolute bedlam. You know, it's full of W5s working the East Coast, and it sounds like that's the band you ought to be on. They're just gigantic signals. You don't want to be in there. For one thing, when you call guys on search and pounce, they won't hear you. You'll be squashed by, every guy in Texas will squash you going to Ohio, and so on and so on. So look at the article in the NCJ and see what happens when 10 meters is good. Of course, now we're faced with 1994. It's 5 years later. The question is, what's going to happen to 10? I looked at my old logs, and in the sunspot down years, 15 was always still pretty good for us on CW. 15 is sort of amazing. In San Diego or even LA, we often can get 15 to be pretty productive, even in the down years. And guys in the Bay Area and Oregon and Seattle will not get that same quality. So we do have an edge over the northern guys when 15 is marginal, and I would recommend you take advantage of that. So really pay attention to it this year and see if that works. 10, you know, who knows if 10 is going to be open. If it's there, use it. That's item number 1. Yeah, Brian.
Question for you. A couple minutes ago you mentioned start the high band, move to the next one, things get slow. For somebody like me without much experience, how slow is slow?
without much experience, yeah, you're just getting started, I know.
Yeah, well, no, I don't have much experience in the SF. I mean, how do you know when to switch? I mean, do you like switch and try it? If it's bad, you go back?
Well, I guess if you're using a computer, which a lot of you probably are doing now, you have your so-called rate window and things like that, and maybe some of you spend too much time looking at your rate window and not enough time working, guys. But I have only used the computer in '93 on CW for the first time in the SS, so I'm not the right guy to comment on that. But for me, it was just intuitive, I guess. It's just you just start to realize that instead of 1.5 QSOs per minute, you know, you're now down to less than 1 or something like that. I mean, the first hour of the SS on 15 and 10, when the band is good, you know, you can do 98 or something like that. I think guys have done over 100. Obviously, you can't sustain that rate, but after about the second hour, if you just get a feel for when the band is going. If you tune, you just don't hear the density of guys. And it's time to move.
Or if you're on too high a band, what you'll find is the opening gets very localized. The opening will get more and more localized, and finally you'll work 80 guys in New York City, and you won't be able to hear anybody else. And that's time to move. Something like that.
That's a good point. Yeah, you might work 3 WB8s in a row that are all giving you Ohio. They're 10 over 9, so you say, well, the band's still open, but all of a sudden, none of the Ohio guys are tuning that band, and this wide range of guys might be gone. So it is time to move.
I have a related question. Sometimes, like when I've switched bands, I get to another band, and God, I just work guys like crazy. I think, damn, I should have switched 15 minutes earlier. Do you guys have that same experience? Should you have that? Is that the correct way to switch bands, or do you switch bands when the rate's about equal on the 2 bands?
No, you'll always have a higher rate when you switch bands, I think. But what you should look at is when you're all done. By the time you're all done on the second band, is your rate equal to what it was on the first band? You know what I mean? You have to look at the whole contest, and you can get that from looking at last year's logs. Say you're on 15. And you switch to 20, and 20's hot, your rate goes up, But by the time you get done with 20, and before 40 opens, say, have you bled 20 dry? If that's the case, maybe you should have stayed on 15 a little longer. So that's a good reason to go back and look at last year's logs and to see what you did and how maybe you could have changed that a little bit to optimize the overall deal.
Do you ever, once you go to a lower band, do you ever realize you made a mistake and then pop back up?
Oh, definitely. But that's why I was about to make the point that what he says is great advice, but unfortunately, once you realize what's happened, it's probably too late to correct it. It helps you for next year if you review the logs. But I think the frequency selection, there's a lot of luck involved, and you hope there's a lot of strategy involved, but let's face it, there's a lot of luck too, because you can't predict everything that's going to happen. You want to look at WWV for starting on Thursday and Friday, and look at the propagation monthly curves in Chad's bulletin for a previous month and so on. Obviously you want to do those things, but it's just an educated guess whether it's going to sustain what you want.
That's one of the best reasons for using 2 radios, is to feel out a second band before moving your emphasis there.
Yeah, and keep in mind the obvious also, that on 10 in particular, it's just a quieter band. Unless you have an extremely localized noise source, it's a different thing. But in general, there's basically no ionospheric noise there that our receivers hear. There's lots of room, and you just hear weaker guys better, and people spread out more on 10, especially phone. So rates can naturally be higher on that band. If you review this article by Dave Patton, in 1989 on phone, W7XR had 2,000 QSOs, some number like that, on 10 in the sweepstakes. 75% of them were on 10 meters, if you can imagine that. And this is a 24-hour contest out of 30, so he has to be on the low bands part of the time at night, and yet his 10-meter rate was so high, it made up for it. But let's, I would say, in the hopes of being organized a little bit, let's talk about this frequency selection thing and the frequency strategy, which relates to your off times at night, and then also relates to how much time is left during the day. The next day, do you want time on the high band the next day, or do you want to use it at night on the low bands? Let's sort of talk about that for the first few minutes, and then slide off into other strategies and equipment and things like that.
You have a question over there.
Okay. Who's away? Dennis?
I was waiting with a quick comment.
Yeah.
For guys with modest stations, there is a little bit different strategy for guys than guys like you. When you can just sit there and people are going to come to you. But what I found, Brian, when I work, and I was just up in Calaveras County with an R7 and the long wire, I'm not going to compete against guys like Glenn in that contest, is when to switch. Is I figured out how long does it take a guy who's tuning to tune the band. By just tuning the band, like with your hunting and pouncing, how long did it take you to go from one end to the other of the people calling? And then I use that time. If I call CQ and nobody calls me within that time period, I'm out of there, or I'm going to hunt and pounce or switch and do something different.
Well, but if you're tuning a small station, your percentage of CQing is probably pretty low anyway.
I don't mean small, I mean modest, good signal, but not 160-foot tower, 48-foot, 72-foot.
Like Dave.
He runs power.
Well, yes.
I got a question.
Yeah, Hank?
As you guys are going through and talking about your band strategies and when to switch and things like that, you might just make some comments and contrast how that might be different in sweepstakes than it would be in some other QSO party or something where you can work a guy on each band.
Well, basically, it's not as important. The band strategy is not as important in sweepstakes as it is in a lot of contests. Because you can only work once in the whole contest in sweepstakes, so if you don't work them on one band, odds are you'll work them on another, so it's not as critical. But I think one thing on phone, you definitely have to attract casual participants who are not in the mainstream of the contest. Especially on 10 and the novice band, of course, in years going by, but I don't think that will be an issue this year. I think 10 is dead. But on 15, if you get out of the mainstream of the contest and get up high in the band, you can attract casual operators, especially if you have a voice cue with some pleading CQs and like CQ anybody anywhere for a contact.
You don't have
please.
to be in the contest.
Right. Then you kind of talk them through it, but so it's good to be on a high band, I think. Pardon me?
Can you give us a sample of a whining?
Whining. It gets whinier as the contest wears on.
Why don't we go to band strategy now? Why don't we just let Dave start, and then Charlie and Glenn can comment too, and then kind of hold your questions until they all say their piece, okay?
Okay, well, I guess hopefully, if the sunspots cooperate this year, the place to start will be 15 meters. Maybe not, though. The 15 may not be open to the East Coast this year. If you've been listening on 15, some days are good, some days are bad. During the CQP, it was pretty good. But there are other days where there are no openings. And if 15 does not open, we've got a serious problem out here. Because what happens is all the 8s and 9s will point their beams toward the East Coast on 20. And consequently,
realizing that they can't hear any 6s on 15,
Right.
they'll go the other way and go down the band.
Right, the whole population density is toward the east. And if the 8s are working the 1s, they'll be so loud with each other that we'll be left out in the cold here. So please, we need 15. But if it doesn't happen, there's nothing you can do to control that. And if there's no 15 meters, then the 5s are going to will predominate in the contest. And the 5s and 0s, maybe even K4VX might get lucky and win one finally.
Yeah.
But those things you don't have control of. But another advantage of being on a high band is it's less crowded, there's a little elbow room, and you will attract people that are not in the contest, especially on phone. And then you have to be nice to them, you have to talk them through it. What year were you first licensed, and all that bit, how much power are you running, and then you get a number from them, make them say a number. There's been a lot of talk about that on the contest reflector lately, about people just assuming number 1. And that's not really kosher, you shouldn't do that. And a lot of times the guy will end up sending in a log and you won't be number 1, and you're really screwed. So make them say a number, and you'd be surprised, you make them say a number, you may say number 50. It happens a lot.
And like your first contact in the contest.
That's right, you just talk them through it that way. No, you're number 55. Oh, geez, why didn't you say so? You know, so you can really get burned if you don't do that. So and staying on the higher frequencies, I think, will attract more of those casual folks. It's about a frequency selection. That's about all I can say. They're trying to stay on the highest band open for them for that reason.
And go to 40 when?
Go to 40 only when 20 peters out. Stay on 20 as long as you can. At least in my case, whereby I have a 2-element 40 that's only at 60 feet. It's rough on sideband. Oh boy, it's rough on sideband. I stay on 20 and bleed it dry before going to 40. And 40 I regard like only as a last resort to get in my 24 hours of operating time.
Oh, but CW's not too bad.
CW is okay. CW is good. 2 elements at 60 feet is fine on 40. Anybody else on frequency selection?
Yeah. Oh. Can I ask a question about frequency selection? For any of you, what about 70, well, those phone sweepstakes, what about 75? I mean, would you rather have a high antenna or a low antenna if you had it? What are you trying to do on 75?
California side.
Well, wait, can we just wait? I think we want to talk about
I'll
antenna.
address that.
We'll get to antenna and heights and stuff like that. Is that okay? I'd just like to hear what you, let each of them say their piece, okay?
What are they trying to do on 75? Just work locals?
Well, the entire western United States. Now, I was just gonna make one comment. As far as band selection, essentially, same as Dave, open on 15 and until it totally goes. Don't discount 10 this year. We had a pretty good hour in the CQP last weekend. I had about 90 queues. Mike had a little longer than I did. He had a couple hundred.
Red.
So, one thing I found totally by accident a few years back on 40 of the sweepstakes is I get up at about 3:30 in the morning, and I have about a pretty good hot hour and a half into the East Coast on 40 before it tends to drop off. So I tend to go to bed a little earlier, run that hour and a half there, and then go back and sleep for an hour or so. And that's happened every year on CW. I don't try it on sideband. I stay away from 40 sideband as much as possible.
What time is that?
3:30 in the morning local.
So 11:30 Zulu.
So
East Coast sunrise is what
It's
it says.
6:30 to 8 o'clock on
Or a
the
little
East
after,
Coast.
yeah.
And the signals are strong, and I tried it again this year in the CQB, it was there. Worked a whole batch of stations right at that time on 40. To address Wayne's question, I personally have a full wave loop on 8075, and it works pretty well throughout the United States. And I don't, it just covers real well, and I don't have to adjust it at all. It's actually set for about 3,700. And I use it on CW and sideband, don't even fool with it, it works great. I've had it up for about 10 years.
Where is it? I mean, how high?
It's the highest point is about 50 feet. And it's just it's like it's like a trapezoid. It goes over to another top of a 50-foot mast, and then down to the corners of the house, and it has about a 120-foot run right at just 10 feet off the ground.
Yeah.
And are you going to 80?
I go to 80
as a
quite
last
early.
resort, or are you going
I
there?
go to 80 quite early usually. I usually by about 9 o'clock local time, I'm usually on 80, and I may go back to 40 later on. But I have a tendency to have quite a number of beers in the contest. By that time, I'm usually ready for some sleep.
That's my job, I open the cans for Charlie.
We've noticed Charlie's rate going way up on Sunday. Little too close like this? Yeah. As of right now, if the contest started tomorrow, I'd start on 15. I assume 10 won't be good. However, if I hear any signals at all during the hour before the sweepstakes, if I see any guys that are S9 plus on 10, I will start on 10 and just get what's there. I mean, we're assuming that people have fairly fast band changing stations. If you're serious in the SS, you need to do that. And so if you start on the wrong band, it's no big deal. I mean, within 6 or 7 minutes, you know, and you're on the next band in 12 seconds anyway. So, you know, don't miss the chance to start high, even if it sounds a little marginal. Regarding Wayne's thing on 75, I think what he was getting at is, do you use 75 meters in California as a place to have high rate, or do you only use it as to sort of fill in the last few of those 24 hours that you have to operate? And I think what Charlie was saying is he's using it to work the metro areas in California that we're not going to work on the high bands. I mean, you can work guys on backscatter, but it's inefficient because you have to get a lot of repeats and all that. And I hate it when another 6 calls me on 15 during the day and it's a lot of QRM. Now you got to work the SOB, and it's going to take 2 minutes probably. I'd rather work the guy on 80 when he's 50 over 9. I mean, Charlie's right about that. But an awful lot of guys in California have poor antennas on 80, and they don't even think about working the sweepstakes on 80. They think, I can't work Missouri, I can't work Ohio, so they go to bed or whatever, if they're casual, you know what I'm saying? So this big magical metro area that's theoretically available out here with hams in it is surprisingly dry on 80 meters in the sweepstakes out here. I use 80 to work more East Coast guys, to tell you the truth, but I have a big antenna up high, so it helps. But I may work like Sac Valley, SV, or Santa Barbara. In fact, I would say you absolutely have to be on 80 some of the time, or you are not going to probably work Santa Barbara, Sac Valley, maybe even SJV, depends on the activity. But Santa Barbara in particular, I don't know, it's always a killer on the high bands. You never hear them. They're too far for backscatter and too close for, they're in the skip zone.
Nevada and Utah too.
Nevada can be that way, right? So,
Of course, we can hear David backscatter just fine.
even if you have a poor antenna on 80, you just have to plan some of the time to be on 80 so you can get to all the California sections and Nevada and so on.
Dave has a remote base in Los Angeles.
That might be what's doing it. But you heard Dave, he said basically he doesn't even like to go to 40, and I imagine 80 isn't a favorite of his either. So he obviously, if he and I compared logs, he's probably got more time on 10, 15, and 20 than I do. I'll bet every contest over the past 20 years. I'm sure I spend more time on 40 and 80, probably to my detriment. But and I will occasionally even go to 40 when it's still sunlight, because I can do it. But if 20 is there, I use 20 because when 10 is dead, 20 becomes the next most highly populated band, I think, at all times in the SS. So, Jim.
I'd like to make a comment about that. Sometimes, if you think that you have a prevailing signal on a certain band, you become so in love with your signal on that band, you let the right bands go by you. You can, like Glenn thinks he's the king of 40, so he's going to spend time on 40, and he maybe ought to be on another band. So you've got to know the bands more, just as much as you know your own capability.
Yeah, that's a good point. In the sprint, for example, I'll go to 40 quite early the first time, but then I'll always go back to 20. Mm-hmm. It's fun to go down there just to know you can work guys, an hour before sunset. But you can't win the sprint doing that. But it's just want to make sure you cover all the bases.
One thing about beating a band to death, remember in sideband, if 10 opens, you're working novices and technicians that you'll never see on any other band. So you really have to beat that to death. Stay on 10 until the last vestige of backscatter and East Coast is gone. Because then when you move down to the low bands at night, for example, it'll be totally fresh clientele, be all raw meat. And so that's a good reason for staying on 10 for a long time on Saturday, just to work all those uniques. And Sunday too, for that matter.
Yeah, I was just going to make one comment. About 5 years ago or so was the first time I was ever over at Dave's place, and I had a little work assignment over near there in California, and I was expecting to see, a couple of large towers, big monobanders, and here I'm practically on the street he lives on, and I still haven't seen any towers yet. And it's just this one little fold over tower by his swimming pool, and that was it.
It's the swimming pool.
I think that's the trick, is having that thing right by the swimming pool.
Yeah, how much salt in the pool?
You use distilled water in the pool to run it through the...
No, it's really salty. It's really salty in the pool. You get salt deposits. I do have a good reflecting plane of salt water about 5 feet down, really bad water that will contaminate the crops. In fact, they have to pump it out because it will rise to the surface and contaminate all the crops. So it is a good reflecting plane that I have. It's flat terrain. But the best piece of advice I ever got from anybody was from Danny K7SS, who told me that the KT34XA and the 2-element 40 just a few feet above it is a dynamite combination, and you'll never have any interaction, and you'll be pleasantly surprised. And I put that setup up, and it works. So if anybody's looking for a magic bullet for cheap, that works. The XA and the 2-element Cushcraft 40.
How many feet?
In my case, it's only 6 feet.
Same orientation or 90?
Same orientation. Same orientation.
How valuable is 10 for novices on CW? I think your comments before were mostly sideband. Does that affect also there on CW?
Well, Not so much, it's the same amount of points, and you just don't see the level of CW activity up there amongst
They're too slow, I mean, they're driving crazy.
In the 10-meter contest, it's worth cultivating a few because they're an 8-point contact, but not the SS. One of the things I haven't done sweepstakes with an amplifier since 1968. And what I tend to do is I tend to stay a little higher in the band for my CQing, like between 50 and 60. That's my particular hangout. This way I stay out of the big guy's hair and can still draw enough crowd that I can keep a very consistent rate on any band that's open. And the one thing that irritates me up there is occasionally you get these digital guys coming down and you'll ask them if you can do a QRL, there won't be a sign, you work 3 stations and all of a sudden one of these digital guys
Starts chirping.
starts giving things. So I just work fake stations and work them right through them. And you can work a VE8 and a VY1 and all kinds of things. And they'll go away if they think they're not bothering you. So.
Except on 14230.
Oh,
Yeah.
No.
That is a champion.
Or on 247.
I often find for smaller stations, you can actually sort of hide under some of these digital or other services and stuff, because most guys will just stay away from them completely. But if you can just kind of nudge up next to them, you can still hear CW through it.
Yeah, there's kind of like little windows in there between them, and
It's like hiding under a ledge or something.
Can you guys talk about times off? Seem to have at least 2 different things up there about what times off.
it's just I used to just do the whole thing and take the whole lump sum until what happened is I was operating up at Bob Eckhouse's, and we had a big gust of wind and it blew one of his garage door open, the garage door opened and set his alarm system off. So, and we didn't know whether there was a prowler in the house or something. By the time this calmed down, I was wide awake, and I said, well, let's see what's happening on 40 for a couple of minutes before I go back to sleep. It was full of people. I mean, it was just wall to wall, East Coast on 40.
At 0330.
At 3:30 in the morning, local time, so.
I may try that next year, but typically I've been taking, you'll find around 1:30 in the morning or 2, there'll be an abrupt fall in the rate. And nothing you do seems to be able to help it. You can bounce back and forth between 40 and 80, but all the guys on the band you've already heard. The CQs will go unanswered, and to me, that's the time to quit. I may try this 3:30 a.m. 40-meter opening this year that Charlie swears by, but then I usually take the whole 6 hours in one chunk at that point. And to me, I found that there's no rush to get on Sunday morning. What you find is that as 40 opens, you get the 9s working the 1s again. They'll all be loud as hell and will be left out in the cold. When you go 40 at first after sunrise, and then 20 very rapidly opens up to where the 9s have got their beams pointing east. And then as the MUF typically goes up pretty quick, and then 15 will open. And a lot of times I spend very little time on 20, and then immediately QSY to 15 when it's open. And hopefully it'll open this year.
You don't take a half hour for dinner?
Dinner?
No.
You can eat on Monday.
Yeah, I usually go on an eating binge from about noon to 2 on Saturday afternoon.
Work a CW contest, you can eat anytime you want.
True. You don't trip the box.
This off-time thing is tied tightly to what your overall plan is on band changing, and which in turn depends on conditions. So you have to be flexible. If you think the high bands are going to be absolutely horrible, then you better be prepared to spend more of your 24 hours on 20, 40, 80, right? Well, that means you're going to have to operate a lot at night. So plan on taking some off time on Sunday. You know, a half hour here and a half hour there.
With 10 of those.
If 10 is wide open, then every daylight moment, make sure you're on. Take no breaks at all during the day if it's that good. I mean, clearly these guys that have over 2,000 QSOs on sideband during the sunspot peak years, they're not taking any breaks during the day on Sunday. Even when it's so-called slow on Sunday, they're still there. They did their sleeping at, 1 to 6 in the morning, somewhere in that general time frame. There's a school of thought around now that says, at least on CW, I think, that you shouldn't take any break at all until midnight local time, the first night. That's a long time to sit in the chair. But it is true, I take no breaks at all until, the earliest I will take a break is about 8:30 local time. So that's what, 7, that's about the 7th hour. 7 to 7.5 hours in, I may take a 30-minute break. That's the minimum. And then I'll get back on again for like 3.5 hours before I take one more break after midnight. And then at that point, I sort of assess what I've done and how good were the high bands, what's going to happen on Sunday, and how much of the time between 1 and 6 in the morning should I be off, and how much should I be on. You know, it's just a feeling you get for what, it's a gamble, you know. Is Sunday going to be worthwhile on 10 and 15 and 20, or isn't it? You could be killing yourself if you sleep too much when 40 is still open. If you're old and like 55 years old or something like that, N6 TJ portable ZD8, for example, let's say you need a potty break. Don't take a clock break. You know, you sit down and start the contest at 1 p.m. local time. By 5:15, you just have got to go like a racehorse. Don't take a break. Don't take a 30-minute break to take a 2-minute whiz. If you can't stay in the chair, that's okay. Run down the hall, hit your porcelain fixture there. You're back on, and you know, before you sit down in the chair, punch your CQ button, and then while you're sitting down, you get your headphones on. You can do a few other things. The point is, now you've lost at most 2 QSOs and probably only 1 during your 2-minute potty break.
But it started a pileup too.
In the old days with tape recorder continuous tape loops, I used to do exactly that. So that's nothing new, Charlie. But I admit I don't do it anymore. I have more class now. I used to literally just let the tape loop CQ for 4 minutes while I went whatever. And when you get back, sure enough, there's an answer. But no, my point is, I'm serious. You can afford a 2-minute whiz break.
Especially when you lose a frequency. You get thrown off the frequency or you change bands, that's the time to hit the pot.
Right. Well, okay, good. That's a good motivator as well, because it's going to take you another minute or minute and a half to get set up again anyway. The point is, the 2 minutes you lose there might count for 2 QSOs. Okay, those are 2 minutes that you can't operate. They're gone, because they're never going to show up in your break time. But if you take a half hour, while 40 is really jumping at 8 in the evening, or 6, say 5 in the evening, let's do it a little earlier. Let's say 5 to 6 in the evening, 20 and 40 are both hot. If you take a full half-hour break there to either eat or go to the bathroom, that's a half hour now that you must operate maybe the next day when 10 and 15 are horrible. And you know, your rate may be 26 the next day when you could have done 39 or so during this half hour that you went to the bathroom. So that's how I'd answer that, Jim. Stay in the chair absolutely as long as you can. The first 12 hours of the contest is about what it amounts to. And with two or 3 half-hour breaks and none during the first 4 hours. Just don't take any. Because it seems like a lot of the casual guys do get on in the first 2, 3, 4 hours, and then they don't get on again until the last hour on Sunday night. A lot of them get on for a while at the beginning because they know it's exciting, dynamic. Then they go away and do family stuff for a day and a half. And then they get back Sunday evening of the family, and they say, oh, the SS goes for another hour, and they get on, and that's when they work their next 30 or 40 guys. So you want to be on then, too, of course.
So you want to be on the last hour now with the way the pins program and all that stuff?
Well, yeah, we could argue about that. I sometimes have not had very good luck in the last hour, so sometimes I try to finish about a half hour before the end. I don't like the last hour. It drives me nuts. Signals all over the place on 40, and everybody you hear, you've already worked, and yet they're all working each other, and you're saying, why the hell are they working each other? I can't work them.
Glenn, I remember we were talking one time, And you'll call 5 CQs, and then you'll get 6 guys call you at once, and the one guy you pick out is a dupe, and the others are...
Yeah, right.
Yeah, Jim.
In the good old days,
How was it in the good old days?
when we used Spark primarily. Anyway, my general rule of thumb was to operate straight through from the start until about 1 a.m., which I figure the East Coast...
That would be 12 hours.
Right. The East Coast guys are going to bed. That's like around their 4 a.m. They're going to bed around that time. So I'll then linger about another 30, 45 minutes past that down on 80 to try and grab the local, and then I'll crash for like 3 to 4 hours. I want to be up for sunrise because, as you know, we can, from the West Coast, get a pretty good punch into the East Coast on 20, and then follow Dave's rule of thumb and then try and be there for 15, and then take a couple of 30-minute breaks Sunday afternoon when you're running out of QSOs, so you want to hit a little buzz and then go away for 30 minutes, change bands, and then try it again and take a couple 30-minute breaks then. And then maybe bag the last hour or so. But
Somebody alluded to the PIMS program. I missed 1 or 2 years out of the past 5 due to work commitments and things like that. And I would say when I got back on, I could really tell the difference on Sunday. I think that little award program they've got where you can, for $1 you get a pin or something for working 100 contacts or whatever it is, there's no doubt that's helped, and rates are better on Sunday. That could argue for taking more off time at night and just being ready for even more high bands. Even when the high bands are not as productive as you'd like, there's just going to be more people there.
It's the coffee.
Because the real small stations, the real casual guys that plan to work 101 QSOs just to get a pin, very likely don't have 40-meter beams, likely have fairly small setups, and you're not going to work them on the low bands if they're far away from you in a metro area like Chicago or Ohio. You're only going to find them on the high bands, so maybe we do want to have more time on Sunday this year. That's why we play this game. It's different every year. You don't know who's going to win and how it's going to go. There are lots of factors. Yeah, Ernie.
Let's talk about antennas on 80s for those of us who don't have rotatable 3-element arrays.
You don't?
Well, I did, but the neighbors took it down. Charlie mentioned an 80-meter loop, and how does that compare to a dipole? And do you have any other tricks about the 80-meter antennas?
I've never really compared it with any other antenna. I did run a comparison between a 40-meter loop and a 40-meter fairly high inverted V a few years ago, and I actually found the signals were they're just a skosh better, just barely detectable better on the loop than a dipole, but the thing I really liked about it was it's a much quieter antenna. There's quite a bit of attenuation and noise, so you hear a lot better. And this is what I really have liked about it, and I've had...
That's the water in your coax, John.
That's on 2 meters.
How does the antenna distinguish between the signal and noise, Charlie?
I don't really know. I'm just saying, when I compared the 40s, that the signal would be just about the same, but the background noise was so much lower.
Is that like line noise?
Well, just general, I very seldom have a whole lot of noise there. I think that you'll like that about that hill is it's very quiet as opposed to a lot of locations.
What I'm trying to get at is it worthwhile putting up dipoles running north-south and east-west versus a loop, or just throwing up a nice long wire that kind of gives you radiation everywhere, up, down, and here and there. What's the consensus of the panel in terms of...
Put up an inverted V, a simple inverted V on the highest tower you have. That's the best thing you can do. If you have
high
northeast.
What is high on 80 meters? High on 80 meters, I mean, a half wave is only 130 feet, so virtually nobody has really high antennas on 80. When antennas are low to the ground, they're not very directional dipoles. So an inverted V is going to do whatever you want, no matter what direction the legs are in. But if you've got a butternut vertical in the backyard and a 50-foot crank-up tower with your tri-bander on it, take the butternut to TRW and put up an inverted V at 45 feet. You guaranteed will do better in the sweepstakes, and probably DX contests too.
Larry Cashman, when he had the WA6 call, about 20 to 30 years ago. N6AR, isn't it, now out on the East Coast?
No.
It's probably N6, Larry Brockman. Well, who? Brockman? Brockman, yeah. He had an article in QSB regarding sweepstakes antennas, and essentially he said, antennas that, anything that exceeds 60 feet are worthless on, or sweepstakes because you want the high angle stuff.
Well, it depends on the frequency, obviously. 60 feet is just a number.
Yeah.
And that's for East Coast, up and down the East Coast, that's very important to those guys on 40 and 80, so they can't be too high. They don't want to know at very high angles. If he's in Virginia or something like that, they need very low.
Did you write an article for the NCJ about antenna heights?
Yeah, that was me comparing my antenna height with Rich up in Reno, KI3V. We've got the same antenna, except he's at 120 feet, and I'm at 60. And I could tell on sideband, he was just running circles around. He could hold the frequency all night on 40. And I was getting bumped around by, people were kicking sand in my face from the East Coast. So I think if there's any way you can get the height, I think height is very important.
Yours is at 60 and his is
60.
120?
His is 130.
130?
Yeah, and he could hold the frequency on 40 sideband, and I could not for any real, not for the whole evening, that's for sure. There's so much pure Mary. Once you lose a frequency on 40, it's very hard to find another one.
You compared with who?
Rich, KI3V.
Oh, yeah. That's right, I saw that.
Reno. Yeah. Reno.
He's a little further west. There might be some little difference
There
there.
might be some, I've heard that he's running a little more juice than I am too, but I don't know about that. But he was definitely holding the frequency where I was not. I listened to him for a while, went out of my way to listen to him, and it was obvious that he was doing much better than I.
I have a question. Do you guys ever save a half hour? I was thinking about this thing as Charlie and line noise in particular. What if really bad line noise came up, and would you save a half hour just to use to avoid a really bad situation or a wire broke loose or something? Save a half hour that you have to take off toward the end of the contest just for some kind of emergency.
Oh, sure. Yeah, depending on how long it lasts, how long the emergency lasts. If it's a 5-minute emergency.
I mean, you might have used up all your time by noon on Sunday. Would you intentionally leave a half hour to take off just for some kind of emergency? Is that a good policy?
Personally, I don't.
I wouldn't say I do it for that specific a reason, but I would say that at noon on Sunday, I always have at least 30 minutes left to take off because I often want to end a half hour early. So at least I can use it then, right? But if something happens, the neighbors come and bang on the door with a battering ram at 2:30, I can take the half hour then and not miss my 24. Then get rid of the neighbors and then finish the contest at 0300. So my answer is, I don't like to enter Sunday with no time off remaining. That is risky. You can have a power failure. I mean, a simple half-hour power failure, would let you use a break. Or if you have no time left, you lose 30 minutes. There goes 30 contacts or 25, whatever it is on Sunday. This year, in '93, it turns out I overslept, and when I got on at 8 o'clock in the morning, I did a Einstein calculation and realized that even if I operated from that moment on until the end, I was only going to get 23 hours in. So that for me, was the first time I'd ever operated all day Sunday without being able to actually take a break. It felt kind of strange to just keep on going, but so that can happen if you oversleep or use up too much time during the night.
Let me just mention 80-meter antenna. I've had good luck with a half sloper on 80. 66-foot piece of wire coming down at a 45-degree angle. In my case, the tower is only 48 feet high, so I run out of airspace, so I have to bend it and scoot it along the ground to make up the resonant length. But for me, that works well, and I've compared with several other antennas that I've been able to put up at the same time while that sloper was up there, and switch back and forth with a whole series of A/B tests, and the sloper wins. The sloper wins against an inverted V, which I had up above the Yagi, kind of coming down, hanging down up at the top of the tower, up at about 70 feet. on an extension.
So you have a sloper running 66 feet down from the tower.
From the top of the tower.
And grounded to the tower.
Well, you
Your
attach
coax.
the shield of the coax to the tower,
Right,
a hose line or
exactly.
something, and then the center conductor feeds the wire.
Okay.
Sloping down at 45-degree
Is
angle.
it going to make any difference in which direction it's sloping off of the tower?
Supposedly it's supposed to slope to the northeast, but I'm allowed in California too, so
You don't notice any degradation
I
at
don't
all.
notice any.
I run them northeast and southwest, and I did some slopers, and it does make a difference. You try to get it towards the direction that you want.
A sloper is more directional if you have bad ground because
Yeah.
the stuff coming down on the back end gets absorbed a little more than the stuff going up. In my case, I've got real good ground. I can't. But another advantage in running it northeast is that the Yagi booms will be over it, and it will not interact with the Yagis as much as if you had it running down in some other direction. That might screw up your Yagis.
Since you've got that dog leg at the bottom, you have it, I think an article said about 10 feet off the ground. If you don't have like a 72-foot tower on your tower, you have to run it down and then you have to dog leg it out.
Right.
You're up, what, about 10 feet off the ground with that dog leg?
Well, it's actually lower than that. You wouldn't want to grab that. That's a high RF voltage amp.
But probably you want it up higher if you can.
It does very little radiating anyway. The high current part is up in
Is
the
up
air.
high.
The low impedance part is up in the air, so there's not much radiating going on. from
Just
that
so
part.
somebody don't walk by and...
You don't want to grab it. There's thousands of volts of RF on that wire.
You gotta see is 160.
Well, it's the same antenna, except it has a knife switch and some more wire.
Glenn, is there any advantage to putting a ferrite balun at the feed point of that kind of antenna?
Of course, you have to have RF.
If I had a box full of beads that I didn't have anything else to do with, would it maybe anything that was equivalent?
A quarter wave sloper, I don't know, I have to think.
Just sorry, shield to the coax.
I just buy an Aztec calendar.
Brian, everybody knows Brian knows about antennas, and he has an Aztec balun on his 40-meter dipole.
Where do you get Aztec balance?
Does somebody sell it?
Ask around.
Swap me.
Dave, you said in your poop sheet here to not worry too much about sections until Sunday. You figure, you big guys, I suppose figure they're always going to come, but I know that there's a strategy that you can run across the section you need and wait quite a while to work that guy and still, as equivalent or trade-off to maintaining a rate, like 10, 15 minutes even sometimes. Right?
Depends which section it is.
If you run across, during the course of changing frequency, when you get knocked off a frequency, or if you have a second receiver, that's a whole new ballgame, and this is the year of the two stations. I'm going to try it this year, but to me, they'll come to you. If you're loud enough to hold a frequency and call CQ, you'd be amazed at how the sections fall in. VY1JA is supposed to be on both modes this year. He answers CQs. He goes around S&P all weekend.
And I'm proud to say I got him started in contesting.
That's an interesting point on frequency selection versus the multiplier, because like KP4 in Virgin Islands, I think if you really got a rate going on 20, you're probably not going to work those two sections on 20, the way you're more likely to find them on 15 or even 10.
But usually that's one I just never seem to have a problem with it down there. It seems within the first half hour, I've got them both every year.
KP4 has been real tough the last 3 years.
It can be.
Yeah, but there comes a point when they're begging for call,
Yeah.
and it's usually Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, well, I was just wondering,
So why waste the time trying to
I
wait?
guess in thinking, talking to Charlie here more, because I'm a low power guy too, you mentioned the one strategy about going up higher in the band and call CQ. Are there some other things you do because you're not running the high power, like do you do search and pounce?
I probably spend 80% of my time CQing, the other 20% search and pounce. And just working everybody that I haven't worked.
When do you change? When you run out of responses to your CQ for a period of time?
Well, what I do, it depends. I search and pounce until I find a clear frequency.
Right.
And throw a QRL.
Do you search and pounce the whole band in low power?
No.
Or just the upper part?
I just usually stay up higher until Sunday. and then I'll do the whole thing, of course.
I'm surprised to hear Charlie say he can CQ 80% of the time though with 100 watts. That's tough. I don't know if I could have the stomach for that. That's hard. But Jim, you were sort of mentioning, I think, if you do find a multiplier when you're tuning and you don't get through right away, how long should you sit there and call this VE6? You know, are you going to get through or aren't you? Well, you know, that's a good question. I mean, how can you give an answer?
Well, there's a little window on CT that tells you how long you can afford. And also, I got this thing from PVRC about 100 years ago. It's a table of, you know, if you expect to work so many multipliers and how many hours you know,
Yeah.
how long you can afford to wait to work a
okay.
multiplier. And even, I mean, the lowest number on here is like 15 minutes. You know, that's the trade-off, you know, one multiplier versus.
Yeah, in the upper scoring areas, I think a multiplier is only worth about 15 contacts or something, isn't that right, Dave? Have you looked at that, done that calculation? I haven't done it for a few years, but back when scores were more like 1,000 QSOs, I think a multiplier was only worth about 12 or 13 contacts.
Well, but that's still.
So the question is, can you go and work 12 other guys, you know, while you're not working that VE6? You know, you're probably going to get through to him in 6 or 7 minutes, so it's probably worth working him. If you're low power, yeah, because you're probably not going to get a VE6 to call you while you're CQing, because I don't think most low power guys CQ 80% of the time, like Charlie indicated. Jim?
Yeah, I think that multipliers, whether it's the X contest or a domestic contest like the SS, the best way to do it is to try it a couple times. On a contest like one of those where the multiplier is probably in a run mode, try them a few times. If you don't get them, then go off and do something else for 5 or 10 minutes, write down this frequency, go back and keep trying every 10, 15, 20 minutes, something like that. And pretty soon the pilot will, or propagation will move in your favor and you'll get the guy.
Or the pilot will go down.
Yeah, the pilot will go down. So, you know, don't kill yourself on one multiplier. It's not worth it.
It's worth about 20 contacts.
But Jim, I don't think you have to write them down anymore. You just put them on your band map on the screen.
That's right. You gotta have your band map.
Is anybody doing that yet? Anybody using CT9? And of course, we haven't had really many major contests since it's been out. And I guess Tree's latest version does that also, where you can basically see like an analog distribution of the band and the call signs you've worked. So that when you tune back across the pileups, you don't have to waste time wondering who that one is. My screen tells me it must be so-and-so. I don't know if we're going forward or not, and stuff like that. It's crazy.
How about pre-contest? Any 3 rules of thumb that I need to do?
Pre-contest, well,
Take a nap.
yeah, I try to get 10 hours of sleep Friday night, which is hard to do because I find I can't sleep 10 hours anymore. No matter how tired I am, I just sort of get up. I don't know, the body starts hurting if you lay in bed more than 8 hours or so. But yeah, I don't go out Friday night, obviously, or whatever, take it easy. And I try to sleep as late as I can so that the nighttime question is not a question of I have to go to sleep involuntarily. It becomes a question of it's I'll do what I want to do. You know, you have to be in charge of the strategy the whole weekend, or it's just not going to work the way you want.
It must be especially difficult with a wife as pretty as yours, man.
It's hard to not just go down the hallway all the
Is this the
time.
question, should you abstain?
Obviously, you'll have to go by the Al Davis or the Raider rule, I guess. I don't know what.
I think that depends on your age. I've been abstaining for several years.
But is it voluntary or not? Anyway, you got to be well rested and eat a major. You know, if you take my advice and don't plan to eat real major food during the contest period, then you should eat probably a fairly major meal on Saturday morning.
Eat a 10K dinner.
There you go. As if you're gonna,
Chorizo and eggs.
I don't know if we're to the point where a high, carbo loading for 3 nights ahead of the contest actually means anything or not, because brain exercise is not the same as physical movement and muscle requirements, so I'm not sure that works. However, I will say this: when I go to Trinidad, I about 4 days before the weekend starts, I start munching very high amino acid content stuff, concentrated nutrition stuff, if you will. And because amino acids allegedly, when you're tired, still help your nerve, what is it, the synapses and so on. The communication circuits in your body work better when you have lots of amino acid intake. So,
What is it?
and that means when you're trying to make these fuzzy decisions after being awake for 40 hours, and I can truly say it makes a difference, at least for me. I really felt like I was more alert all the time.
This isn't a Twinkie, is it?
No, these are not Twinkies now.
What is it?
I don't recall the name. I mean, it's just some of these high nutrition things. You know, go to the GNC store. That might be one. Yeah, that's not one that I've taken, but I know I have a friend who eats them. The diet and all that is a whole other sort of question, because you do have off time in the sweepstakes, so it's not as critical. You can munch a little bit here and there. The X contest, it's different. You really can't afford to take time to eat. So it's more important what you do ahead of the contest there. But in the sweepstakes, you can live a somewhat normal life. But I don't eat any heavy meals at all during the SS, just a few munchies here and there.
Yeah, that's usually my intake during the SS is a salad and beer. That's it.
There you go.
I think your score during the SS depends more on what you do before the contest than what you do during the contest. And I think it's important to have a checklist of things to do before the contest, and make sure you run through them all and get them all done. On the handout, this first top part here is the checklist that I use, and I've added a few things on here for this little briefing. But
It's surprising, by the way, how long it takes to do all those things.
oh, it takes a long time.
You have to
do all
start like midweek at the
That's right.
latest. or you
Some of
can't
them,
get
like
done.
keeping your line noise under control, is a never-ending battle.
That's a year,
It's
right.
something you need to really do. There's an excellent article on line noise and how to find line noise in September '93 QST, I believe. And I brought my little line noise detector here in case anybody wants to take a look at it. It's built on a Radio Shack VHF AM receiver. Works great. You can find the line noise, call up the power company. If you can find it, they'll fix it. And do all those things. Make sure you hook up the computer and hook up the radios, hook up the antennas you're going to use, run them all at a kilowatt, make sure it all talks to each other, or doesn't talk to each other, as the case may be.
Especially if you have a computer.
Especially with the computer. Make sure the monitor doesn't go blank, or the monitor interferes with your antennas. Sometimes just moving the cables around will solve an interference problem. And that's something you don't want to do when you go to 40 meters, all of a sudden the monitor goes blank. And it's very depressing and irritating, and it's a downer, and it will depress your performance when trying to solve all that while it's going on. So your checklist will evolve with time as more and more things come up. Like one time I burned down a palm tree because it fell over into the 80-meter sloper, and you add that onto the checklist next year. I saw that. Yeah, fortunately, that was the dog's favorite palm tree. Unfortunately, it wasn't anywhere near it at the time. But it's amazed at what can happen when high voltage touches the palm tree. So anyway.
What do you eat or not eat?
I usually pig out just before the contest, don't eat at all until I quit at 1 o'clock in the morning or whenever. I usually have a couple of stiff drinks at that time to immediately wind down and go to bed, maybe a couple of sandwiches or something like that. And get up in the morning, a couple of bagels and coffee, and don't eat again until it's all over.
I was going to ask about the going to bed part, because I'm usually so spun up that, 1 in the morning, just have all the bits and bobs in the section, and I'm counting up the things I haven't worked yet and all that. That takes me a good half hour to go to sleep.
Yeah.
Have 5 or 6.
Try it.
Yeah, about 4 or 5 ounces will do it.
A little 3 or 4 ounces of some good Trinidad black rum or something like that in a sandwich, and it should put you under. You probably need to have a little anti-stimulus, Jim. Didn't know the SS excited you so much.
What would you guys suggest for a multi-operator station? This pretty much has all been geared to going it alone.
Don't eat beans.
I've never done it or never even considered it.
I'll be using 2 radios, first time this year, so I guess you need the band pass filters for each transceiver. The Moon Stars, I guess, are good ones. I guess the other outfit makes a good one too.
What is the multi-op rule in SS? Can you have simultaneous stations?
No.
No, he's talking about multi-operator, not multi-transmitter, just multi,
Well, I understand.
multi-single.
You can still have only one signal on the air at any one
Yeah.
time, right? So you have to have an octopus type arrangement. Yeah, okay. Because I've only done it once or twice many years ago, and I didn't know whether the rule had changed or not.
Art K6XT and I did multi-op at his place last year, and we were both tuning the whole time. And, you know, I mean, if the guy was running, you know, the other guy would hit the head or get a beer or something, but, you know, whenever things started to slow down at all, the other guy was looking for, you know, another band for, or even on the same band for multiplier. And, I don't know if we did well, but it was interesting for both of us, because we'd never done multi-op. Plus, we were using packet. And I think packet cluster is probably pretty useless in sweepstakes, unless KP2 or VE8 or one of those turns out to be a real problem. And then when it's on there, it's like, whoa.
You know, that's kind of interesting, and I might just throw this out. There were, I don't know if it reached the clusters down here, but there was some discussion on the San Francisco and the Northern California clusters that we get up in the Antelope Valley. And in particular, W6GO got on and published a list that you could download from his bulletin station, his bulletin board, essentially of all the cluster activity on his cluster during the sweepstakes. And there were any number of stations who, if you went and looked in QST, were listing themselves as single operator, but they were on the cluster saying, anybody here VE8 and stuff like that. And it really was kind of ugly. And I have a hunch that there may be some cracking down this year. If anyone's tempted to do that, and you want to go for score and use the cluster, do it, but just enter as a multi-op or assisted or whatever it is, and the score still counts the same.
Multi-op includes using the packet cluster.
Yeah.
One thing you'll notice probably, if you look at multi-op scores like Jim was talking about, you'll notice that very rarely has a multi-op ever beaten the top single ops, if ever, maybe. I think the reason for it is fairly obvious, and that is that as you change operators every couple hours, let's say, if it's a classic one-station setup and you just alternate operators, the guy who sits down hasn't been listening to the band for 2 hours, and he has to either use a doop sheet more or use other means to figure out who he can call and who he can't call. There's more time wasted figuring out who to work. Whereas a single op that's on all by himself, gets a feel for the band.
But I think multi-op has evolved into it's not the old classic multi-op where you take turns. Multi-op has evolved into a totally integrated, multi-station, networked, multi-amplifier if you're running high power.
For our community, we both wanted to get some sleep. That was our main motivation.
So it's really just you were sharing one rig.
That's the classic multi-op.
Yeah.
It's hard to win.
I'm sure you had a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, if I didn't have, when anything went wrong with the station or wasn't quite what it was supposed to be,
How about physical setup of the station?
I think a comfortable chair is the most important.
I think a selection of chairs helps. If you have more than one chair, after your fanny gets tired in one position, you can drag in another chair, or even stand up or kneel down, change positions. That really helps. There's a conflict now between how much does the computer going to take and how much is the radio going to take. Now it's getting to the point where the radio is shoved into the background and all the computer stuff is up front. Yeah. Keyboard has to be right in front of you. Monitor has to be right in front of you. The radio is now relegated to the corner.
you guys use towels or foam pads or something for the arms?
No, there's a trick you can use. Take some insulation material that you use for 3/4 inch copper tubing and put it on the edge of your table.
Fantastic.
It works great.
Yeah. That gray black gray pipe foam, it's slid down one side and it just bites right onto the edge of the table.
Better than those keyboard pads you bought.
Yeah.
If you got your keyboard up near that, we worked a few contests with it.
We jumped on that, I
It
jumped on that by accident.
Much more
Two
comfortable.
contests ago.
What do you do with it? You cut it in half?
No, it's already
You just cut it to the length you want. It's split all the way down one side and kind of firm, held together. You just open that slit,
Jam
put
it on the
it,
table.
slide it onto the edge, and you've got sort of a round thing.
You see, in Yuma, they don't know what insulation is.
How many of you that are going to work the sweepstakes are not going to use a computer this year? Hey, Dick?
I probably won't.
Charlie probably won't. So, you know, it used to be that the most important things, I think, in the physical setup of the station were things like what do you do with the dupe sheet and so on. And that used to be a real big part of the layout and the strategy, but it's probably less important now. I mean, everybody says they're using a computer, so there's your dupe sheet.
Keep the dupe
But,
sheets handy when the computer goes
Yes.
Yeah. But when the large physical dupe sheet was necessary in the sweepstakes, you know, where that goes on the desk, and does your sending arm and writing hand obscure half of it while you're working, or can you always be able to read it while you're sending? And, you know, all these things mattered a lot. Now I guess it doesn't anymore.
Oh, yes, it does.
Except for Dick. But
Keep it off to the right-hand side, just to the right.
there's still something about a master dupe sheet where every call is out there all at once that still is better than a computer display in some circumstances. I can find guys very fast in the sweepstakes on a manual sheet that I keep.
Contest with the rates that they are, you can keep them up to date without too much trouble, it seems to me.
With a memory keyer on CW, it's not hard at all
Yeah.
to discipline yourself how to do it. Jim?
How many have remote tuning devices?
Like the Eclatech tuning knob?
Yeah.
Larry, you have one of the Eclatechs?
Yeah.
Yeah, and Jim has one?
I've got a Ten-Tech's got their own version of that.
Uh-huh.
But it's because of what Dave said about the computer becoming more important than the rig. I have a cabinet where I put the Omni that's over to the left, and it's got a big digital display on it so I can see it very easily. And I can reach over to change bandwidth if I need it, or RIT and stuff like that, but I have the remote tuning knob just to the left. I have a laptop computer, and I've got the keyer paddle just to the right, and the keyers, the speed control for the keyers just back of the tuning knob on the left side. So really, the main centerpiece is the computer, and I can just reach over here and hit the paddle if I need to send something and so on. And I don't really need the rig right there.
How many people have used the computer programs where you can tune with your shift keys? Anybody use that yet?
With the RIT, that's N6TR's program, I think,
Yeah.
the RIT plus
Anybody
minus.
tried that yet?
I haven't tried that. I have a remote tuning device on my 950 right next to the keyboard, and I've moved the radio now. It used to be the radio had to be right in front, and I had the computer laptop monitor up above, which strained my neck and everything. Now I've just shoved the 950 off to the left. Everything's done with remote. The monitor, the computer, the monitor right down in front now, and the remote device right next to it. It is a world of difference.
In fact, I'm trying to, there's a lot of room in this box with the 10-tech remote knob, and I'm trying to put the 4 keyer memories and a remote pot to do the keyer speed, so I don't even need the outboard keyer right there. I can just put that off on the shelf somewhere and just do it.
Don't forget about the mic gain, the noise blanker, the notch control. In fact, why don't you bring the whole front panel? Right? Why don't you move the radio in
I
there?
don't use any of that stuff. If I had to use the speed control right on the remote tuning knob, then all I need is right where my left hand falls next to the keyboard, and the paddle where my right hand falls next to the keyboard.
If you read,
Slow movement.
if you read Dave's hint sheet, there's a subtle thing on there about what you do with your RF gain control and your AGC and things like that. Now, those are things that experienced CW guys know that aren't necessarily related just to sweepstakes. But one interesting dilemma is, as the computer starts to dominate, the radio is just a thing that the signals come out of and come into your headphones. But Dave is right. You need to be able to play with the RF gain. You need to be able to play with the AGC. You just can't put the radio too far away to where it's uncomfortable to use it. And
Well, I'm not suggesting to put it far away. I've got it on a shelf a foot to the left so I can read the frequency, and I can just, all I have to do is lift the hand up and you can hit any of the buttons or turn any of the knobs, reaching rather than just being right here in front of you because the computer...
yeah, well, obviously the radio can't be directly in front.
Right.
Dave, why do you suggest turning off the AGC? I mean, I see you said riding the RF gain control, but Jesus Louise, it's hard to hear, isn't it?
Well, it sort of depends on the characteristics of the audio amp in your radio. Some radios will knock your ears off when a loud signal comes along, and it depends what headphones you're using. Sometimes there's a certain amount of compression in there too. But you definitely want to be down on the linear portion of the AGC curve where a louder station will sound louder in your headphones. You don't want everybody sounding the same amplitude, because a guy who's just slightly out of your passband will start compressing a weak signal who's in your passband or centered in the passband. You know, or if multiple guys will call you, one loud and one weak, for example, it will compress into an unintelligible mush. Whereas if you were down on the linear portion of the curve, one will stand out. And you can hear them both, actually. You can take your pick. One guy will be, oh, that's the loud guy, and then there's the weak guy. And you can hear them both. Whereas if you had the AGC up in the nonlinear region, it would squish them all down, and you wouldn't be able to hear anything.
You also don't get all the popping and extraneous garbage that these radios all produce.
Right.
When it is up in the nonlinear part, and all that adds to your fatigue and general disgust with why am I sitting here doing this?
Right, and general background noise.
Which is easy enough to be overcome with anyway.
I just suggest too, on that very point, one of the things, I don't know if any of you have DSPs now, but even the one that was in QST, that sort of primitive W9GR one, in the noise reduction mode, I use that all the time on CW now, no matter what's going on, because it gets rid of those dynamic pops that kind of make you cringe, make your ears scrunch up and so on, and it sort of levels out at least the background noise in that respect, and it's very helpful.
To change the subject a little, how about Vox versus foot switch or push to talk?
Well, you can't curse with Vox. Well, you can, but...
I like Vox. I like the way the voice keyer trips the box. That way I don't have to worry about the voice keyer keying the radio. It's one less interface to worry about. My audio and the voice keyer audio just tee in, and whoever talks trips the box.
Yeah.
I like Vox. You can. I suppose you could operate with a foot switch too. Once you get, I think it depends what you get used to.
You guys all use boom sets?
I've got a homemade one, cheap Radio Shack headphones with a Heil element stuck out on a wire in front of it.
Yeah, I think it goes without saying, you know, no hand mics and no, not even a desk mic that sits in prime territory and has a cable that runs around and gets under your arm, and you know, those things are pretty obvious. I mean,
It helps to have a nice long cable, so if you get up, it doesn't pull your ears off.
Vox is a little tough in multi-ops, when you're yelling multipliers or Charlie snoring in the background. You know,
is the pizza
it
here
doesn't work.
yet?
Yeah.
No, I personally like the foot switch for voice operation. Use it pretty much exclusively and have for years. CW, I just use full QSK.
Yeah, on phone, in Trinidad, I've started using Vox, I guess, finally in the phone contest, and I have to admit I like it now. Voxes nowadays are much smoother and nicer than they used to be. That's about the bottom line. They definitely are okay now. Used to be they weren't so good. But I still have a foot switch there as a backup, and occasionally use it just for variety. CW, I use full break-in almost exclusively. I have for 15 years, pretty much. A lot of guys don't like full break-in. They say they don't like all the, whatever they call it, noise. They say, I can hear all that noise all the time. Well, but you know what they're hearing? They've got their damn RF gain up wide, and they're not playing with the AGC enough. So, of course, your radio is going to pop and click and bang at you as all these loud guys hit, you know, in there. And so if you're full break-in, you have to be able to play with the receiver to keep it comfortable.
So what do you
But
think?
full break-in, I would say, no doubt, you know, buys me 20 or 25 QSOs in a CW SS because I can abort in the middle of a contact when I realize it's not really a contact, things like that. There's no doubt it pays off.
But where do you set the AGC on CW?
I set it usually on fast. When I was really young, I left it off all the time because I could handle huge dynamic ranges, and I thought I was immortal and my ears would last forever. But I finally decided, I guess when I was 30 or 35, you know, my ears are going to go away if I don't get this under control. So I started, you know, forcing myself to use AGC, but I do ride the RF gain control to keep it down in the area of response where you want it, and you know, you don't get the ugly stuff, but you still get the advantages. I realize that if you want to use two hands on a computer keyboard, it makes it harder to play with the radio, but the radio is still a very integral part of how you're going to do. You just can't put it aside and say that it's just a signal source and all I have to do is learn to type. That isn't how you do it.
Speaking of that sort of stuff, and I don't know if people here have done it, but Dave's about to tackle it and I want to tackle it. What do you do with the audio in a two radio system? Are you switching them? Are you mixing them? How are you going to handle that, Dave?
The hot setup seems to be, from what I gather, is to put one radio in the left ear, one radio in the right, and to cross-couple them a little bit with a resistor, so that the left audio appears about 20 dB down in your right ear. So you can actually hear both radios in both ears, but one is much louder than the other, if you know what I mean. That seems to be what most people have settled on as the optimum way to do that.
And then using Vox on CW as opposed to full QSK?
CW with N6TR's program is supposed to handle switching between the two radios.
Right.
And once you know how to do it, supposedly it's supposed to be relatively second nature. You hook your keyer paddle to the computer then becomes your keyer. And the computer memories then come out of the same ports as your paddle does, as the key, as manual key. And it goes to the right radio. Hopefully all that works. I don't have any experience yet, but that's...
I have heard that some of the guys are using an audio mixer. Apparently Radio Shack or places like that sell, I don't know, $80, $90 little audio mixers. And so you can put more than one source and more than one output, and you can play some games that way to get this distribution of audio the way you want. I think Tree is doing that. I think they also, most of the guys, even if they have the shared audio all the time, I think they also have a switch where they can put only one radio in both ears, because you do copy CW better with both ears, there's no doubt about it. So if things are marginal, you want to be able to instantly hit a switch and concentrate only on the one thing that needs concentrating on. I don't have the mixer deal, but I have a miniature toggle switch under the radio on the left, if I have two radios set up, which is not all the time. And but it's just a simple thing that takes, I push it to the left, you got the left radio in both ears, push it to the right radio in both ears, push it in the middle, it just splits them equally. I guess what I should be doing now is adding in one of these mixer things and then be able to play with that too.
Does anybody have a feel difference between the Heil HC4 and HC5 elements? Experience?
Which one is the wider band?
The 5 is a high 5.
I prefer the peak about 2.5 kilohertz. Has a little bit more punch right at that middle part of the audio.
On the 4 is that, Terry?
On the 4.
Yeah.
It peaks up a little bit more right at about 2.5 kilohertz. That has a little more punch. Jerry and I have done some experiments with that.
It depends on the radio too, So a lot of radios have different characteristics and they sound different with different mics. I have a TS-850 and I like the wide band one.
Depends upon your voice.
It depends a lot on your voice characteristics, true.
Key player there.
Right.
Well, on Ascension, I've been using the HC4, this is with the 950, and our good friend W6Y8 thinks that maybe I'm losing some of the punch, and it's too bass, I guess, and now they're using the HC5, and I'm just wondering if anybody similar
Well, the
voices.
HC5 is wider range, so you'll get back some of your bass. Is that what you're saying? That's what he's saying?
Yeah, right, I'm clipping off, I guess where the energy in my voice spectrum is. So I just wondered if anybody had any experience with that.
Yeah, I have HC5s in my boom sets, and I've never had the desire to go to a 4. I don't particularly like the 4, I guess. I have a fairly high voice, so I don't want it to be any more restricted than it already is. I need all the range I can get, in my case. And again, because of the radio. I mean, you have a certain passband that you're trying to fill in the radio.
Yeah, I've heard for years about reversing the phase in one of the earphones. On one radio setup on CW, I've heard for years about reversing the phase in one of the earphones. You get better spatial separations perception of spatial separation on signals.
Does
Wondering if that's a
work,
valid
right?
contest.
I tried, the only two radio contests that operated was the SS a couple of years ago at Rick's and 6MD. And I made a little switch box where I could run either radio and headphones. And then I could also run the alternate radio, either separated. I'm sorry, that's not clear. Run one radio mono right in the middle, and the other radio could be run out of phase. And the effect that you get is one is centered, the other is diffused. And I thought this is fantastic, because it can be very distracting to hear two things in separate ears. Within 10 minutes of using it, I realized it didn't work at all. So I switched over and used, one radio here and one radio here. And I did notice that Glenn's point of, I really got annoyed hearing the primary radio in just one ear. And so as soon as I could possibly do it, I would put that radio in both ears. So the out of phase thing, I thought was a great idea. And it was just
Well, the question is one radio and running earphones out of phase to get that spatial separation rather than the signal.
I don't think it'll do anything for you. I don't think it makes a big difference.
I wanted to back up real quick on that mic and HC4 and 5. And the thing I used to run is I basically get on there, what I think I'm going to run, get on the week before, whatever, and get some guys anywhere that are going down in the mud. You got a guy that's S3 or S4 and that you can still maintain contact with and say, hey, do not look at your S meter. I'm just going to do something here. Maintain your power and ALC and everything. And just ask the guy, hey,
Tell him to close his eyes.
what do you, everything, just whatever. Just concentrate on my voice and tell me what you perceive as being louder. That's it. And that's work. And because everybody's going to say HC4 works for me, HC5, your voice, your radio, to hell with it. You just got to get on and experiment with different
And whether or not you have aftermarket filters in your radio, for example, like a Kenwood or,
I think another thing that's really important on a phone is not to turn your compression up too high.
Yeah.
And not to judge your intelligibility by how high your power meter.
You want to get more funky with tight shorts on?
Yeah, so
that's also critical. If you check into the swap net on Saturday, Clarence will tell you that your processor doesn't sound good.
I think
Am I right, Dennis? Unbelievable.
No, he doesn't like my Henry fan.
Well, in setting the compression level, if you listen to yourself in the monitor, which I think you ought to do all the time, because there's nothing worse than having RF in your audio or something like this and not knowing you've got it. So listen to yourself in the monitor all the time. I mean, when you're setting the compression level, just flip the radio into the send mode, don't speak, and bring your compression up until the background noise suddenly starts to rise. And then back it off from that point. That's the way I usually say it.
But it still could be too high at that point, because your voice, when the compression can get really high, your voice may sound mushy. A lot of signals you hear in contests, it's real mushy.
Yeah, a lot of guys do set it too high. There's no doubt about it. But I never tell them, because I figure it hurts them.
Right.
Let them do it. I mean,
Well, tell the SCCC guys you do.
if I hear W7XR and I don't think he's very intelligible, I'm not going to tell him.
Great signal.
Tell him on Monday. Geez, John, you sounded horrible. I mean, every guy in Ohio is going to tell him anyway. All the do-gooders are going to tell him the whole weekend. So, but if if you can get a 10 QSO advantage by not telling him, why tell him? Especially if you sound good.
They all tell Seymour that, and he ignores them.
Yeah.
Seymour's a special case.
You have to ignore a certain amount of on-the-air criticism, though. You have to realize you're overloading a lot of receivers on there, and some guy will come on and tell you, hey, you're 6 KC wide. 6 KC, that's not bad.
And now turn your blanker off, please.
Why don't we go one more round of questions? We're sort of staying over here a little bit. It's great. So, any more questions?
I have a question. Did any of you guys that run high power and have really big signals, you guys ever get hecklers? Yeah. You ever get hecklers and heat contesters? And,
You don't have to be high powered to get those.
You don't have to.
Do you keep going, or do you find
That goes
you
with
give up?
Keep going, ignore them completely, and they'll go away.
Work people right through.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But sometimes the heckler is in the right skip area, and he's running 1,000 watts, and he's 20 over 9. I mean, if you're getting a serious jammer, this is not a time for egos. This is a time to find a new frequency and keep working people in the contest. That's what you're trying to do. If you lose sight of that, if you get into a pissing contest with some guy for 7 minutes, what have you proved? Nothing. You just lost.
If it's 20 sideband on Sunday afternoon, and there are no other good frequencies, it pays
Good point.
to stay in flight.
Yeah. If you don't have a lot of choices. If you don't have a lot of choices.
If the heckler's in a section you need, do you work with them?
Yeah, and put down QSO number 1 for them.
There's also a new breed of guys who've gotten very adept at switching between VFO A and VFO B, and will come and tell you, hey, you're too close to me, Dave. You're too close.
Yeah.
You know, and
Competitors.
they're up 2.3 kc. Now, there's a certain gray area here. I don't think anybody should expect a totally clear channel on 20 sideband on Sunday afternoon. So you have to reason with these guys and say, hey, look, there's no place else in this, there are no clear frequencies on this band. It's very hard to argue with a guy when he knows your name, too. These guys are getting very good. They all know your name. Dave, you're too close to me. You know, so right away, oh, it's somebody I know. It's a friendly, yeah. Yeah, it's a friendly request, but a certain amount of that, and especially this year where 15 is going to be marginal at best. Everybody and their brother's going to be on 20. There's going to be more of that this year.
Be a dogfight.
And you just have to realize that going in, that nobody has a right to a totally clear frequency. And there's a certain amount of jostling that's going to go on, especially in a 20 sideband.
Is it question or comment time, you said?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, a couple items. I did find that the slopers work better than the inverted V, but and in fact I had to get away from the inverted V because one end of it was, to get the inverted V broadside to northeast, it brought one end of it over my shack, and that tore the hell out of the computer. And Ken came up with a good solution, saved my life and a few other people also, about there's a keyboard you can buy that is almost RFI proof. Very few instances that I get back into the computer, but that's where it was getting in when you couldn't shield it, you couldn't beat it. You just laid your hands and coupled the RF, depending on, I guess, your overall grounding system and proximity of your antennas. So for guys that are very condensed, RF in the computer will kill you if you haven't been there. So think about the slopers rather than if you have to wind up dressing a wire over the top of your roof. If the sloper has to come over the top of your computer, well, at least with a sloper, you only got one piece of wire to move around, and it's not that critical. You don't have, it seems like the end nulls that you have off the inverted V, and those aren't that bad.
It seems like voltage points can be worse than so-called high current points.
They are.
Keep that in mind when you put your antennas up on a small location, or a city lot, whatever.
Another item was, when things get slow, a little thing that I've done, I didn't hear anybody mention it, but you got 2 VFOs, and mostly I don't think anybody's running a rig without 2 VFOs, and if you're on there and you've done a lot of your hunting and pouncing, and call CQ with a little bit of lag time, punch the other VFO and be tuning down a little bit, listen here, go call CQ, listen, punch the other VFO, and you can hunt and pounce while calling CQ as another trick if you get good at it. And you won't lose your CQ frequency. Usually at that time things are slow. The last item is, I should know this, but in K1EA where he calculates your time off, I can never, when I log my time on and off, and then when I look at how he calculates, I guess any time you don't have an entry within 15 minutes, he counts that as a time off period or something in that. But it seems like I always get more time off than what I've calculated as time off. Does everybody run into that with K1EA?
You mean when you let the K1EA do it for you? Yeah. I noticed that also. Yeah. Like I said, in '93 was the first time I had done it. But I still kept a manual time on off sheet, which I've done for years. It's a special little thing that I've made up to where no matter how tired I am, I can't screw up and miscalculate. I probably should have brought one along. It's not a perfect thing, but it works for me. And I kept that sheet independent of the computer. In fact, I ended up just ignoring the computer times because of that ambiguity. I knew my little handwritten sheet was still the way to go there.
You submit that sheet along with your logs?
Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. Yeah. Because it automatically lists, on, off, on, off, on, off. So during the contest, I check myself 2 ways. I can continuously add my on times and see if that makes sense. See if the total of that plus the time remaining equals 30 hours. And I can add all the off times. And you see what I'm saying? I can come at it from both ways, and if they don't agree, I know that I've made a mistake.
Is that the voice of experience from screwing up once or twice?
Actually, I don't think I ever have, but
I have.
But that'll make you do it.
I've lost an hour to make a believer out of you. I do exactly the same thing as Glenn does. I keep it manually, and I keep separate track of the on times and the off times and make sure they jive.
I think K1EA is looking at, most contests, if you're listening, you're on the air, but K1EA is looking for an entry. You've been listening for 20 minutes. You really haven't been off the air. I think that's where the anomaly comes from. There's a discrepancy there. It doesn't know when you're listening.
Maybe he you should have a switch command in the program for the sweepstakes where you, or any contest where there is mandatory off time, where the operator says, you know, Alt-K or something, which tells the computer, start right now for the off
I
period.
think there is a command in there for off or on.
Yeah, something.
Well, it could be, like I say, I'm not the familiar
Something like
guy.
a shift-o or something.
You can set the threshold time in K1EA. I'm pretty sure.
I may try an N6TR's program this year, which means I'll even be further behind the learning curve.
Well, he doesn't count time on and off at all. as far
Doesn't he?
as I know.
Yeah.
Unless it's hidden somewhere in the manual and I haven't found it.
I like to do it manually, that way you can keep track of the rubber clocking a little better too.
Yeah, well, I like the half-hour breaks because it got rid of a lot of that.
Yes.
I mean, years ago, guys would take 7-minute breaks and nonsense like this, and it was obvious that some guys were operating 24 hours and 40 minutes. But that's another story. That's history. Barry?
Hey Glenn, I get a question for everybody that is computer logging. What do you do for disaster recovery, if any? In other words, if you lost your hard drive, do you take copies of your floppies along the way during your contest or anything like that? Or
Yeah, I would do type in auto log and then
Auto save. That's on the hour, but I find I just keep typing save.
Yeah, I type save log. I'm
Have a fast
paranoid.
computer.
I type save log fairly
Yeah,
often.
and on an XT, it's grueling.
If you're in autosave, it may go into the save mode right while you're trying to figure out what to do with the VE8. And you learn about these things the first time the hard way.
Off-go floppy or anything in case your hard drive, God forbid that ever happens.
Auto save test sentence.
Yeah, well, you can also set the thing up to log every contact directly to the printer as it's happening.
But routinely, I think it's a good idea to have a tape recorder on for the entire
Right on.
contest. You have it all down. The D44BC a few years ago, Julio wanted the log, so he took it down to the Cape Verde Copy Company, and they totally trashed page number 10, and I got over to the other island. Oh my God, there's no page number 10. But I know I had the entire contest on the tape. I went back to California and transcribed it, and I rescued the log. So, taping is fun and interesting.
If you're going to tape it, a VCR is a good way to tape it. If you tune the VCR video to a time and weather channel and put the audio, and record the audio on the VCR, you get 6 hours of recording time that way. It's pretty good quality. If you use an i5 VCR, it's excellent quality.
I tried that years ago, and I started to play it back, and said, bullshit, turned it off, threw the tape away, and forgot.
Yeah, if you don't already.
Didn't want to relive that contest again, huh?
Never had courage enough to do that over.
Yeah, it's a real art.
Okay, final question?
I've got a point I want to comment. I think Dave touches on this. Started at high speed, CW, slow down as the rate fall. Our old friend Don Wallace, W6AM, had a mode that he used to call friendly CQing. And when I sweepstaked from his place back in the 70s, I found that it really worked. Sunday afternoon, kind of when the football games finished, just got down to 15, 20 words a minute called CQ, and the number ones I got was just overwhelming. So friendly CQing definitely works on Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, that kind of goes along with being up high in the band, to try to work that crowd a little bit.
Having a
I
plain
did
tone in your voice.
I did a recording, it was NAQP or something, and I said, all I need is your state and number or something. I put it in on my CQ. I was amazed at the amount of people who are so intimidated by contesters. They're afraid, they don't know what to
In
do.
other words, you were putting, the instruction to them was even
Right,
part of the
CQ.
pleading. That sounds like a good move, actually.
Yeah, it works.
Because then they don't have to be embarrassed by
Right.
asking you what they need to do. They already know, and they can pretend they're experts.
Yeah.
So there's a little psychology there, maybe.
Did they give their calls though also?
That's
I don't know how
funny.
much more time
That
we
was
have
funny.
here.
I said, all I need is your name and something, and the guy would come back and not give me his call. And I go, oh.
George, 5
And
minutes.
disappear.
I don't know how much more time we have, Larry.
We're almost out of tape, I
Okay.
think. Any desperate last question? Well, if not,
Thank
thank you
you.
very much. Also, Ken, 86FO, sent a bunch of articles from various magazines and Hamfest about sweepstakes. If anybody'd like to look them and copy them, they're here available. And also, if anybody wants to be a guest operator, who has a station, who wants to host a guest operator, come and see me as soon as we're through here.
That reminds me, Larry did a lot of work last year on getting the club organized on SS, and he looks like he's doing it again this year. I think Larry needs a large round of applause for all the work he's done. It's really nice to see all the reactivated interest in the SS. And keep in mind, this is a West Coast contest in many ways. This is our chance to really show these East Coast guys that you don't just point your beam at Europe and call CQ. So,
the hell with the East Coast,
get on there and
Northern California.
hold up the West Coast honor by getting in the sweepstakes and hit it hard.
Talk it up with your pal.
Very appreciative.
Thank you for coming to the Southern California Contest Club. 73 WA6MHZ.